Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, the show is about to begin. Welcome. How are we tonight?
Good.
It already feels like a comedy setup. Bill's a comedian, so beware.
Well, I hate when they make you do it again, so we're not going to do that. Come on, you can be louder.
I am Ben Freeman. I am the director of the Democratizing Foreign Policy program at the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft.
Yay.
Wow. Thank you.
That concludes our show.
Unwrap all of that. For those of you who don't know, the Quincy Institute is a new-ish think tank, but certainly by think tank standards, we are the kid on the block. We're only about 6 years old, and we are one of the only, perhaps the only think tank that is solely dedicated to stopping wars. We are already against the. We are already against the next war. We are a single-issue organization. We are nonprofit and nonpartisan. And I promised I wouldn't put you to work, but I'm going to put you to work. We need your help. We are hopelessly outgunned. Not hopelessly. We are woefully outgunned physically and metaphorically in D.C., surrounded by a lot of organizations. We're very well funded and financed by the war machine. So we are, as you're considering your charitable giving, always think of the Quincy Institute, if you would. My program, I mentioned the Democratizing Foreign Policy program, our program. We are, frankly, we are the money in politics guys. We are the people who are trying to take U.S. foreign policy away from the hands of the powerful and democratize it, give it back to the people. We want a foreign policy for the people, not the powerful. We follow the money, and we hope you will too with us. I am joined here tonight by my incredible co-author, colleague, and I'm going to embarrass him, mentor. This is, ladies and gentlemen, this is the Bill Hartung. Quick round of applause for Bill.
As opposed to the other one.
The Bill Hartung. For those of you who don't, everybody knows Bill. So I feel in so many audience, everybody knows Bill. For those of you that don't know, Bill is really an icon in this place. For more than 40 years, he has been fighting the good fight. He has been fighting back against the military-industrial complex. And he has mentored dozens, if not hundreds of folks along the way. I count myself proudly in that camp. And Bill has written, I believe, thousands of articles on this topic right now.
Well, they all say the same thing, but yeah.
4 books. This is his most recent, but previously, some of y'all might have read Prophets of War, just a fantastic book Bill put out a few years ago. I could go on and on about you, but you're really, truly a legend in the field. So, I'm honored to share a stage with him. And we are both very honored to be here with you. I'd be remiss for not thanking the wonderful folks at Town Hall for hosting us. Our friends in the back, Washington State Physicians for Social Responsibility. Thank you guys so much. Cheers for them. We worked with Sean. He found this venue. So thank you so much for all the wonderful work that you do. You guys are really fighting the good fight too. Thank you very much. Last but certainly not least, this wonderful man on the far end of the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Alvin Grayland. Alvin graciously agreed to moderate this panel, and as you can probably already tell, we're quite the handful. He agreed to moderate this panel just 5 days ago, so that's why you didn't see him up on the sign. Alvin, and I'm going to cheat. I'm going to pull out my phone. I know you're not supposed to do this at the dinner table, but here we go. Alvin has done too much to keep track of, so I wrote some cliff notes here, Alvin. He has over 35 years building technology across the U.S., China, and Taiwan. He has founded 4 startups. He has created more apps than he can count. I tried to count, and I also couldn't count. And he was moving back and forth between the U.S., China, and Taiwan since the 90s, which is, I think to say you're crazy jet-lagged and sleep-deprived for decades. He's really at the cutting edge of AI research. After scouring your bio, Alvin, I have determined you are an AI hipster.
I got there before it was cool. You
were there before it was cool. Alvin seriously was putting AI models together 20 years ago, if I'm not mistaken.
Actually, 30-something years.
30-something.
Wow. It was so long ago, it was just I.
It was just Alvin's intelligence. He's done it all. All 5 layers of the AI cake, built data centers, designing chips, shipping PCs, smartphones, smart glasses. He's really done it all. He's an AI guru. These days, he's really slowed down. He's only working at 3 different places simultaneously. So he is simultaneously a digital fellow at Stanford's HAI, a senior fellow at Asia Society Center for China Analysis, and he is a professor right here of AI and technology policy at the University of Washington. He advises governments, Fortune 1000 leaders. I could just go on and on. He wrote a wonderful book. I should have brought my copy. I'm sorry, Alvin. It's called Our Next Reality. It is, as far as I'm concerned, it is the book on AI. It's just wonderful, Alvin. I say all of that. One key credential I have to mention. His brother is the first Chinese-born American to be a senior officer on a U.S. Navy nuclear submarine. And he has the thankless job of being the moderator for this panel. And I will stop talking, but Al, please give it up for Alvin.
So I guess I'm supposed to be moderating. I don't think I really have the credentials to be doing so much on the military side, but I will try to keep it lively. We already have 2 comedians here. So, well, let's get started, because I think what you guys are talking about is really top of the news every day, right? There's 2 wars going on. There's a depletion of weapons that are very clear. 60% of the Patriots and THAADs are essentially gone. What does that say about? Is that an argument for what you've said in your book, or is that a counter argument for what you've said?
If you subsidize a genocidal war and you arm Ukraine to defend itself, you start unnecessary war in Iran, you sell weapons to 100 countries, you're going to run out of stuff. So I think it's a combination of policy and budget. And of course, a lot of the stuff they're supposed is very expensive. So Iran is using, drones that are in the tens of thousands against our missiles that are in the millions. So I think the problem is, to some degree, our arms industry is about generating profits, not about things that would work in a conflict or other way. So there's got to be kind of a realignment. We know we're a defensive strategy, at which point you wouldn't run out of this stuff, and ideally the goal is not to have to use it. And we're getting rid of our economic development agency, we're decimating the State Department, so we've kind of narrowed down to the military tool, which hasn't been working that well, even from the military's point of view. So I think there's an industrial part and there's a kind of policy part. But I think, of course, what they're saying is, oh God, we're out, we need more. Well, it depends what we're going to be doing.
I mean, there's no 2 ways about it with the Iran war. The Iran war is a war of choice. Nothing about the Iran war has made any American safer. It's raised our gas prices, it's raised the cost of goods across the board, cost the lives of service members, dozens of service members, hundreds wounded. There's no benefit to it. It's a war of choice. And the munition stockpile is just another consequence of another foolish war. And I do think it is part of the American war machine. It has enabled this in the weakening of congressional oversight of war powers has allowed this. The empowerment of the executive branch has allowed this to happen. So I view this, unfortunately, as a testament to our argument in the $1 trillion war machine. That because we have this $1 trillion military budget, we go looking for monsters abroad to destroy. The system has to have that to keep the self-perpetuating system going. The Iran war is just the latest iteration of that.
So what drove you to actually write this book? What's changed since the book has been, I'm sure you sent the manuscript in, a year and a half ago. So what has changed, and what do you think would be most surprising to people who actually read your entire book?
All right, well, I'll do it brief and then you can fix it. That's how we did the book. I wrote a bunch of junk and he fixed it. Even while we were writing the book, the tech sector, I think, rose to the public consciousness in a way that it wasn't in November 2023 when we started. And of course, there's another war in Iran, which to me is the least justified war in history. Even George W. Bush at least ginned up some fake paperwork. We're going towards a $1.5 trillion Pentagon budget if Trump gets his way, which I don't think he will. So it's all moving faster than we expected. We thought $1 trillion was sort of this number in the distance that even the hawks thought was unrealistic, and they just blew through that, and they're just going for it.
Yeah. I'll address why we felt compelled to write this book, and I'll tell you, I'm going to out Bill. Bill didn't want to write the book.
True.
But I sold him on it because what we were seeing, he had already written, for those of you that have read Prophets of War, it's an excellent book about the military-industrial complex. But what we were seeing at the Quincy Institute and from colleagues elsewhere is that the military-industrial complex, the war machine as we call it in the book, it was metastasizing. It was growing on steroids, and it was growing into different places that we just hadn't seen it before. Everywhere you went, whether, for those of you that have read the book, it's in your sporting events, it's in your video games, it's in your movies, it's in your TV shows. Everywhere you go, the war machine is there feeding you this propaganda. And we hadn't seen anybody out there, ourselves included, who would put this all together, who would put all these disparate things together. And what we wanted to create a resource that had all of this put together and painted this picture, which even for us as we were writing it, it was humbling at times, the writing of this book, because you sort of felt cooked, when we were putting together the entertainment chapter, and you realize that more than 2,500 TV shows and movies have been influenced by the Pentagon. The Pentagon's Entertainment Liaison Office literally gets script access before a movie comes out, before a TV show comes out. They can alter the script, they can change plots, and if you don't do what they say, you will not get their cooperation, you will not get to use their fancy gadgets. It blew me away, when we learned this, and I sort of felt, a little dejected, and I wanted to share. Not that I wanted to, make people depressed, but we felt compelled to share that information, and that's why we wrote the book, and that's why we love having conversations just like this.
So Bill, you just mentioned the $1.5 trillion budget that's being proposed. What is the chance that actually gets approved, and what's the process between now and then?
They're not going to get all of it. I mean, you can't add 50% to your budget and do it usefully, especially if you're the Pentagon. But it's being done in different ways, and one piece of it is being done in a special process called reconciliation, which is not that popular among many members, and that's 300 of the 500 billion is there. That might get blocked. But the thing is, they ask for so much, we could roll back quite a bit, and they would still get a 10 or 20% increase, which was kind of the point. Just go for as much as you can get, and then if it gets rolled back, you still are ahead of the game.
I think that's it. Like this strategy of Trump, unfortunately, it might work. He's not going to get the 1.5. As Bill said with the budget reconciliation, there's $350 billion of this is in that bucket of budget reconciliation. That's not going to happen. He's not going to get all that. There's no way. But I think on some level, he knew that going in. He was stretching the window of what's the realm of the possibility. So he's not going to get that, and he's going to, boo-hoo, I didn't get that whole thing. But even if he gets a fraction of that plus up, you're talking about $150 billion, realistically. I would say that's the number. That's going to be the plus up, ending up with a $1.15 trillion budget. $150 billion is extraordinary. You think of, the roughly $10 billion that taken from USAID that decimated it. You could pay USAID's budget for 15 years with the amount of money that's potentially going to be added to the Pentagon. And so, yes, I don't think he's going to get the $1.5 trillion, but I do think there's a decent possibility that the budget grows up by an extraordinary amount. So
both of you guys are talking about he wants this budget. Is it really him that's trying to figure this out? Does he really have the strategy to add 50% to the budget, or there's somebody else behind it doing this?
He's got a big, beautiful strategy, which is he likes big numbers. But yeah, there's people, I don't know, strategy? I mean, he wants to build Golden Dome, which he says will be a perfect defense, which is not possible. And they'll do it in 3 years, which they can't even tie their shoes in 3 years. So there's that part, which is just, there's the Trump-class battleship. There's sort of a narcissistic element And then there's also people who have ideas of what they want. They want more nimble technology. They want better targeting. They want to build stuff that doesn't cost so much and isn't sitting in the hangar for so long. And there's debates a little bit about, maybe all these wars haven't been so successful either in terms of their objectives or for our vets or for our economy. But in this administration, that's a very tiny group. But I think more congressmen are finally standing up. I mean, the majority of them in the Democratic side voted against the defense bill, which rarely happens.
Right.
So I think, and I think the public between the genocide and the war at home with ICE and the fact that they're really cutting into programs that they never touched before is awakening. So, I think there's room for an actual debate that's not just about Mr. Trump's fantasies.
So you talked about the Golden Dome, and this reminds me of Star Wars back in the Reagan days. And people said Star Wars actually creates instability because it actually forces people to do things before the Star Wars is completed. Does Golden Dome actually, is it even possible? And if it is possible, does it increase instability in the balance that we have?
Yeah, the problem is, the theory about nukes, which isn't necessarily gospel, is, they want to have enough so that they know it's not worth messing with. If you attack us, we'll attack you in return. So the problem is, if they thought Golden Dome was going to work and blunt their attack, they would feel vulnerable and they'd have to build more missiles. So it'd be sort of an offense-defense arms race. Where you're using the shield so you can kill them with your sword. So it's not really defensive in that sense. It's just part of the arms race. And that's one of the reasons they tried to roll it back under Nixon. And then W. Bush got rid of that treaty. So it's really, it's not defensive. It's actually one of the reasons I think China is building up. They feel vulnerable.
Anytime when you're talking about Golden Dome, you're talking about missile defense, and we as a nation have been talking about this since the end of World War II. This is an over 70 years long discussion, and Golden Dome, to its credit, it will not be the first program to fail at it. Star Wars wasn't the first. There were multiple Pentagon initiatives in the decades that preceded that even. And they all failed, and you can fully expect Golden Dome to never rise up to this impenetrable level that Trump has expected. And if you do start to approach that level, the costs of this go up and up and up the more effective it is. Todd Harrison at the conservative American Enterprise Institute, he put the full cost of Golden Dome potentially over $2 trillion if it's spec'd out to the president's standards. And even then, it's not going to be 100% foolproof. No missile defense system ever is. You're seeing that in the Iran war right now. I mean, arguably, nobody does missile defense better than Israel, but still, little Iran with its tiny military, some of its missiles are still getting through. And so that's going to be the same thing with Golden Dome.
So let's switch topics a little bit to lobbyists. That was a big part of your book, and and how they're so influential and there's so much rotating door there. What makes them effective? Well, not what's the biggest part, but what's the most effective part of lobbying for the military-industrial complex today?
You're the guy in there.
Sure, yeah. It's connections, and if you hire a lobbyist, you're hiring them. I would say for a Rolodex, but now we don't. Our Rolodexes are all right here, right? You're hiring them for who they can text on a moment's notice. You're hiring them because they don't have to schedule a meeting with a critical member of Congress. They got them in their phone. They can text, they can call them up immediately, and that's what makes lobbyists effective. And right now the defense industry has over 1,000 lobbyists on their payroll, and it's quickly getting to the point where there are 2 defense industry lobbyists for every member of Congress. It's unfathomable. They can double team the members of Congress here. And many of these folks themselves are former members of Congress, or they're the chiefs of staff, or they're the military legislative assistants, or they're key staffers on the armed services committees. We interviewed a bunch of lobbyists for this book, went into some of these lobbying offices, and it's fascinating when you talk to them about their actual process and how they get their win. And we discuss some of this in the book, and some of what we don't include in the book, I'll tell you now. Their process is very transactional. They don't go in there, those of us on the outside, Bill's done great work about the problems with weapon systems. I've done good work on the problems with weapon systems. And one of the examples we lay out in the book is about the littoral combat ship. I was working at an organization called the Project on Government Oversight. We were working with whistleblowers on this ship, and they were telling us just how ineffective the ship was. And
you call it the little crappy ship or something?
The little crappy ship, yeah. Within the Navy, that name came from within the Navy. The sailors themselves were saying, this is a little crappy ship, and we were getting documents saying just how bad this was. And so we interviewed a lobbyist who was working on this at the time. He was on the other side. He was working for one of the contractors on the LCS program at the time. And he said flat out, he's like, Ben, you had photos of cracks. You had photos of the broken equipment. You had photos of the rust. It's like, we couldn't argue that away. That was already in the public consciousness. And I was like, all right, so what'd you do? And he was like, jobs. We went in and we told them exactly how many jobs for this program were in their districts, exactly how much money was coming to their districts because of this program. And we let them know that a vote against the LCS would be a vote against their jobs. And they went around every single office that program touched. They went in and they told them that. And ultimately, we lost the LCS fight, and they kept building. And this is now almost 15 years old. It's still a little crappy ship.
Well, even more importantly, when Ben went to talk to the lobbyists, he said, Ben, if you go work for them, we'll sell more books. But he didn't go for it.
Good for you. So yesterday when we were having lunch, you said something that actually surprised me. You said that there was 4 times as many people, lobbyists for the AI industry as there is for the military-industrial complex. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, you got your work cut out for you, Alan. Yeah, your space is riddled with it right now. The stats are about 1 in 4 lobbyists walking the streets of DC right now are working on AI, and it's remarkable. So you see all this. I've talked to folks here about data centers and the pushback here in this community. It's the same thing. I live in Florida. There's huge pushback there at the local level, but they have 3,000 lobbyists. There are 3 times as many lobbyists working on AI as there are even working on defense. And defense is a huge lobby. So and there's some crossover with these folks too. But the AI lobby right now is just extraordinarily powerful. And so when you're wondering, very well funded, yeah. So you don't cross over, Alvin, please.
So let's talk actually about the new primes. So Andrew and Palantir, they're what are they doing differently than the old legacy primes? And is what they're doing more effective? Are they winning?
It's going to be a long fight. I think they can produce things more quickly. Whether they're going to work as advertised is the big question. But they're very ambitious. They've got these fantasies. They're both named after objects in Lord of the Rings. And Elon Musk wants to colonize space, and the head of Anduril did a little essay about the Arsenal of Democracy 2.0, where he basically said, yeah, we're quicker, we have the software, we have the model. Lockheed Martin should be given like a lifetime achievement award and retired, basically. But the problem is, as he said with the little combat ship, they have existing facilities, and so Congress is going to back them, whereas the administration is interpenetrated by the tech companies. So within all that, we have to see if they produce anything that's better. My feeling is, if they were just a vendor, like show me this widget, if it works, I'll buy it. But they're trying to influence our foreign policy, our economy, our way of life, our culture, how our minds work. I'm like, just stick to what you allegedly know about it. I don't want you running all this other stuff. So a lot of it's almost independent of the technology. It's the ideology of the people at the top. And obviously that's not all Silicon Valley, but the loud ones,
Well, they're both being funded, or they were funded by Peter Thiel and his philosophy.
Yes, yes.
You left out Palmer Luckey's incredible fashion sense.
Yes, yes.
This guy, right, for those that don't know, I would encourage you later, Google Palmer Luckey and the images of him. He shows up to board meetings in board shorts and a bathing suit and flip-flops. The interesting thing about this defense tech battle, though, on a very serious note, is that for years, they were the outsiders looking in, and the primes for the longest time, they would just gobble up any competition. If you're Lockheed, you're Raytheon, and I would dare say Boeing, you would just any challenger to you, you'd buy them up, and you would eliminate the competition that way, so you could consolidate all of that. Well, when you start talking about somebody like Elon Musk and a SpaceX, you're not buying them out, and Palmer Luckey, also a multi-billionaire, you're not buying him out. So that they were sort of insulated from the prime's dominance that way. Palmer Luckey, and he has said publicly that you could fund the Department of Defense for $500 billion. He's proposing, the radical going the other way, not 1.5 trillion. You could go back to $500 billion if you were buying the right things and you were doing it right. He, of course, thinks doing it right means buying Anduril products. But what they have overcome, you mentioned earlier, what's changed since we wrote this? We started writing this now almost 3 years ago. And that in the Biden administration, what has changed radically is, as these firms are coming up, they had I mentioned the jobs piece of this. Their jobs were very consolidated. They're Silicon Valley jobs. They're by and large tech companies, and so they're not spread across the nation like Lockheed Martin's jobs are. The F-35 program claims jobs in almost every single state. They didn't have that. They're starting to have that now. There are Anduril jobs, right within a few miles from here. Giant facility in Ohio. They're putting jobs in swing states, and their lobbyists, they're diverse, or they're adding to their lobbying portfolio. We talked off the record with lobbyists who were representing some of these firms as we were writing the book, and they were sort of boo-hooing. We don't have the jobs argument. We don't, and we're lonely. We don't have a lot of lobbyists. Anduril right now has more lobbyists on their payroll than the Quincy Institute has total employees. Anduril now has over 40 lobbyists working for them.
What is that company? I can't hear about it.
Anduril. It's Anduril. It's it's a technology, a more private-based prime where they build the technology first and then they sell it to the government versus they get contracts to design by the government and they can take as long as they want. So at least that's the pitch from Lucky, is that we're more efficient because we build it and then we show the government, do you want to buy it? And it's supposed to be a lot more cost effective. So actually, I want to hear your argument. Why is that a bad thing?
That's a great thing. And the defense, or the tech coming into the defense industry, I think for a lot of people who were looking at this, they welcomed it. And anybody who takes a hard look at the defense acquisition system, they know it's broken. Like everybody gets it. Like, you want to talk to people about waste, fraud, and abuse at the Pentagon? Talk to people at the Pentagon. They tell you firsthand just how crooked the system has been, how ineffective, a lot of these weapons these primes are making. So tech coming in was viewed by many as a good thing, as a potential, a prospect of hope that instead of, having this antiquated equipment that's worked its way through the acquisition system, we need to fix it. Everybody knows we need to fix it. The problem is what we're seeing is, in addition to what Bill mentioned about the sort of kind of the crazy ideology of a lot of these folks, is that we haven't seen them come in and displace the primes. What we've seen is a rising Pentagon budget is lifting all boats. So the primes are still getting a huge chunk of the pie, and money's being added to go to these defense tech firms. We're not getting more efficient. We're getting old Cold War weapons alongside the new defense tech.
Do you think there will be a shift over time, though? I mean, it feels like if it's that much more efficient and it's that much faster to get products out, that over time the budget would shift over to these new primes.
There's such a, I call it it's like an autoimmune resistance to change that the primes have created. Again, in theory, I completely agree with you, Alvin, but they go back, the primes can go back for the F-35 program, is a great example. it's jobs. The F-35 program say, we got jobs in all of your districts. You're not going to cancel the F-35 program. And most military observers will tell you, like, manned fighter aircraft, that's not the way of the future. We're seeing this in Ukraine, we're seeing this in Iran. The battlefields of today are showing us that's not the way to go. So what is the Defense Department doing instead in this crazy administration? They're saying, you know what? Not only are we going to fund the F-35, let's double down. Let's get an F-47. Let's make that new fighter also manned.
And, if it's a higher number, it works better, obviously.
I thought it was just because it's the 47th president.
Oh, right, there's that. The alleged president. But, the other thing is, like, what are we using these weapons for? And, Palmer Luckey will go on TV and say, oh, we're going to bury China. And this notion that technology is going to save us was used in Vietnam, used in Afghanistan, used in Iraq. And they lost to local forces that were using bombs attached to their telephones. When we had precision-guided munitions, an Air Force, they didn't have anti-aircraft. So the idea that, oh yeah, if we only just get the right technology, that's an old story, even though this is different tech.
So, continuing on the kind of technology question, recently there was the big hoopla about Anthropic and Palantir, wanting to maybe remove them and replace them with other AI companies that were, less restrictive, because they wanted to control how the Department of War uses their technology. What's your view in terms of a company like Anthropic, who supposedly is more, human-centric, and versus some of the other companies that kind of jumped in when they decided to take a stronger stance?
I would like to use my Uno reverse card and get you to answer this question.
Okay.
What do you think, seriously?
I actually think that Anthropic is their positions are much more self-serving than they seem. They play themselves out, and you look at their name as Anthropic, it's about humans, but the reality is that they are really more about how do they control this industry and trying to practice regulatory capture. And the fact that the day after Trump announced that they're going to work with China to create a safety guidelines for AI, they then came back out and said, oh, you should never work with China on safety because they're just not trustworthy. To me, to derail safety talks between the two biggest countries that are creating these things, that this could actually be a real benefit. If you're really for human flourishing, you would probably want these two countries not to fight with each other. And to try to derail that, to me, that's a very, a disingenuous type of practice. And the fact that he has said to his team that he believes that one day the world will just be a single private company in the world will just be Anthropic, and then all the other governments. That's his view of the future. I don't know if that was broadcast widely, but that was something that he said to his team. And to me, that is like a Jesus syndrome, that he wants to be the monopoly of the world. I think that is a very dangerous person to have in a position of power. So, but with that said, I don't think the other 4 or 5 companies that jumped in to want to work with the Department of War are any better. They're all doing the same things. They all wanted Sam Altman jumped in the day after Anthropic said they wanted to restrict it so it doesn't do autonomous weapons and it doesn't do domestic surveillance, right? And he essentially said, oh, we'll do it. So, and he's the guy that started OpenAI, saying that he didn't want to be under the thumbs of Google because Google was working with the government on military projects. So these guys, you have to be careful what they say and what they do.
I would just jump in on that, and a credit to your work, Alvin. Alvin has done some amazing work on laying out why an AI arms race is so dangerous, and why AI cooperation on AI regulation is very much needed. And what you were just talking about there, with AI very much getting in bed with the Department of Defense, that it really plays into what we lay out in the book, The $1 Trillion War Machine. because, the moment you start contracting with the Pentagon, then it becomes profitable for these AI companies to pitch this as an AI arms race, to pitch AI as a national security issue, and not just something that can, help you figure out what workout you might do today.
In fact, I mean, if you look at the spending this year, it's going to be $1 trillion to do CapEx build out. So it is also, there's a second parallel $1 trillion war machine that's going on the AI side.
Wait, do we have to change the title again?
the $2 trillion war machines. Well, you're going to add something?
We should have just called it the war machine, because that would stay constant.
Yeah, pretty soon $1 trillion don't mean much anymore. Actually, you were talking about the Cold War, and there are some people who say, hey, there's a parallel now where, the Cold War, we won it because the USSR essentially bankrupted themselves building arms. Do you see a similar thing right now where, where we may be creating massive economic instability in America because we're overbuilding AI in a race with China?
Well, I think, it was partly arms, it was partly the rigidity of their economy. The Soviet economy couldn't compete in the new world. But we're doing exactly what we said buried them. We're overspending on the military, we're cutting R&D. We spend a week of that war with Iran was more than they're planning to spend on the Centers for Disease Control, the Environmental Protection Agency for a year. So they're giving up on pandemics, they're giving up on climate, and they're throwing all their money at senseless war. So it's kind of like, it's the most extreme version of what we've seen, and it's got the most damaging effects that I've seen in a long time. So, I think people are reacting. It's just organizing takes time, and destruction is quick. So we're kind of in a race here.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought this up, Albert. This is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. I teach defense budget classes to active duty military personnel. I end every one of those lectures with a talk about defense and the national debt. I view the national debt as the greatest threat to national security, and I'll give you a couple reasons for that. Our national debt right now, over $40 trillion. Our budget deficits now are exceeding $2 trillion every single year. And third fact, and I swear I'll stop throwing numbers at you. Our interest payments on the debt now are over $1 trillion. We are literally spending more on our government credit card interest rate than we are on our entire military. And the reason I bring this up at the end is because at some point there's a squeezing function that happens there, and that we're spending so much on those interest payments, we're racking up so much debt that other things will eventually have to be cut. And whether that's the military, whether that's Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, you go down the list, it's not sustainable, the path we're on now. And it's also not one of the reasons why our subtitle is bankrupting us at home, because we have these $2 trillion budget deficits every year. Every single penny of our military spending is debt financed, all of it. And so anytime Congress goes back and says, we need another $60 billion for the Iran war, we need this $1.5 trillion budget, every penny of that is debt financed, and it's only adding to this bad debt spiral the U.S. is on.
So you mentioned China earlier. Now, is China a real legitimate national security threat to America?
Not in the reasons they say. I mean, militarily, no, I don't think so. Their play is economic. The Belt and Road Initiative, trade. Some of those deals are not great for the people of those countries. But we're sort of like, we're fighting different wars. The U.S. has 750 military bases, hundreds of thousands of troops overseas. We spent $8 trillion on wars in this century, while China is making deals. So they do have a military that has some regional power, and certainly compared to their neighbors, but they're not building the 800 bases. They don't have 11 aircraft carriers. They haven't been in a war, a direct shooting war of any consequence since Vietnam in 1969, which they didn't even do that well. And so it's a different strategy, and for us to double down on the military, in some ways helps them, I think.
I mean, I think very much that China is they are the pacing threat, the perceived pacing threat that the war machine needs. Without China right now, without hawks, drumming up this China fear, you look out at the world's not that scary. It's certainly not scary enough to justify $1 trillion military budget. And so for the military-industrial complex, they need China. They need China to look really scary. They need to talk about, China's military spending going up. They need to talk about Chinese, naval capabilities increasing. None of that really means China is an actual threat to us here. There's no, I was in China a few months ago, and the number one question I was sort of expecting, based on the hawks in D.C. telling you about what you're going to experience in China, they're, beware. I expected boogeyman around every corner. But needless to say, people were wonderful. They were very nice. They didn't understand us. It was much more that they didn't understand our militarism. And so I spent a lot of time actually handing out the book to explaining to people, you want to know why we're so hostile. This is it. We have this military, this war economy, and you are, unfortunately, you are the target. You are the subject of that economy right now. So he couldn't understand the animosity towards China, because everybody said exactly what you said, Alvin. China's an economic power. They want to be an economic power. They certainly don't want to get into a hot kinetic war with the U.S. And they really can't understand, a lot of folks in China at least can't understand why we have this great animosity towards them. And it's hard to understand if you don't read the $1 trillion war machine.
Well, the classic example is at the end of the Cold War. Colin Powell said, kind of running out of enemies here. I got Cuba, I got North Korea, and then they came up with this two major conflicts strategy. Well, there's Iran, there's Iraq, there's North Korea, which really was to justify keeping the budget from completely cratering. And then as the war on terror wound down, they started talking about China. So it's like threat of the month. Like you need something to justify all this money. At least China has a navy, has an air force, has nuclear weapons. It's a better model to say, well, they're playing in all the areas that we're playing, therefore we need more. But more is less, because what we really need to do is prevent a war with China, not fight one.
Just one very quick point on that too, and Bill per usual hit the nail on the head. If you look at the public opinion poll, it tells you why China is the enemy. Public opinion and concerns about terrorism start to plummet in the teens there. We get Osama bin Laden, and then people really start to ask, what the heck are we doing in these endless wars? And so concerns about terrorism start to go away. So the justification for GWAT, which for over a decade, that was the pacing thing that could drive budgets up. China starts to rise. Fears about China come in right after that, and you could feel it in D.C. It was just suddenly like this shift. I was like, suddenly everybody's talking about China. And it was very deliberate, because you have to have that external enemy to justify this system.
So when people talk about China, the next word they say is Taiwan. Taiwan, our ally, we got to protect them, and the whole strategic ambiguity issue. So what's your view on Taiwan? What is a viable and rational way to deal with Taiwan and China?
I want to use my Uno reverse card again.
Actually, I want to hear your opinion, and I'm happy.
And then you can correct the record.
Well, for decades there was an understanding. The U.S. wasn't going to recognize Taiwan as politically independent, and China was not going to take it by force. There's more complexities in there. That was kind of the rough idea. And then the U.S. kind of shifted gears. China got more impatient. But they've been running these war games, assuming we're going to go to war with China, and nobody wins. Taiwan, which is the site of the war, suffers huge casualties. Their economy sinks for decades. The U.S. loses all kinds of troops and ships, and most of them don't even talk about could it go nuclear. So they're basically preparing for disaster instead of trying to figure out how to head off that disaster. And we're paying a price for that.
Maybe one point I would add to it is we keep talking about, okay, there's data center, the fabs are on Taiwan, we need to protect our supply of chips, and that's why we need to protect Taiwan. I think that's actually very misguided, right? And the people say, oh, China wants to take over Taiwan so they can get access to those fabs, which is also misguided because the reality is that those fabs require materials, chemicals, device maintenance from the rest of the world. And if that stops for a week, those fabs stop, right? So there's no reason for China to go there and essentially, spend trillions of dollars, lose their status around the world to get something that would work for a week, right? And all the people that are going to be running it would probably leave or would be hurt or something, and there's nobody to operate it. So it's a false incentive.
How are we doing on time for the audience? Do you know?
We still have time.
We got a moderator.
Oh, yeah.
I'm watching. We've got time. Actually, if you guys have a question, feel free to interrupt.
Well, I just was thinking, and you may have addressed, I have not read the book, but what is the interaction between ideology and safety of, from the perception of the country itself versus the corporate interest in making a lot of money? Because it seems like if you took perhaps the political parties as an example, there's a segment of at least one party, or maybe both, who just want to make a lot of money. And there are a lot of corporations who want to make a lot of money. And the issue of actual security is not at the heart of those decisions.
Yeah, I would just say for run of show too, for us, we need to, because we are on camera, hi. We panelists, we do just repeat the question as best as we can. So yeah, I'm happy to take this one, at least the first stab. It's sort of a question of the profit motive of this industry versus the ideology. And I love the question because I think it's so important for people to understand when they're looking at the defense sector that the number one motive, there's all this, salute for service, sponsored by Northrop Grumman, the flyover is sponsored by General Dynamics, and very, very troop-centric in their branding. At the end of the day, their number one priority, these are publicly traded corporations. They are designed, they are literally bound to increase shareholder value. And that is mission number one. National security is actually number two. Making a very good weapon. There's some corollaries here in the medical industry where, if you built the perfect, if you had the perfect prescription drug that you just take one that cures you, you're done. Like, that's not profitable. There's a lot of, similar corollaries here. You build the perfect weapon system that doesn't require a long service contract. Well, that's not really profitable. We want to we don't just want to sell you the plane. We want to keep fixing it too. So there's very perverse incentives built in exactly because of the profit motive that you laid out there. And I think a lot of people just gloss right over that.
Yeah, I think it's like a toxic mix of greed and ideology, and they reinforce each other. If people don't buy that America should dominate the world so China doesn't, or that we're the shining city on the hill, as Reagan said, or we're just the toughest kid on the block, and isn't that great? If people don't believe that, then the profits go away. On the other hand, I think some people do believe it. I think in the Trump world, the greed is obvious, but I think also it's almost like I wouldn't say psychosis, but it's kind of this added problem that I think even if you took the money out, people have to rethink who are we as human beings, what role should our country play in the world, could we be cooperative and not dominant? So I think we have to fight on both fronts. We have to sort of say that there's a better way to be human beings, there's a better way to run a country, there's a better way to build the world, and we need positive examples of that, not just, hey, they're ripping us off, although that certainly is true.
A quick two-figure, I would be remiss if I didn't say this. If you didn't buy anything that Hartung and Freeman just said, just know this. I think it was 2023, Lockheed Martin did a $6 billion stock buyback. Billion with a B, of their own stock they bought back. They did that to drive up the stock price, and they did that at the expense of a lot of the other things we've been talking about, like when we were talking about the munitions shortfall that we're seeing. Lockheed could have used that money for R&D, could have used it to expand munitions capacity, could have used it to do things that could have better prepared us for some of these conflicts. But again, their priorities, driving up shareholder value, so they spent those billions of dollars explicitly to drive up shareholder value, which did absolutely nothing to help U.S. national security or support any troops. And I guess unless they had Lockheed stock.
Yeah, and actually that's also reflected in the behavior of the AI companies as well, right? If you look at the story that you keep hearing from the AI labs is, we have to have the best model, the biggest model, so that we can then beat China, and we need it for national defense. Right? But the thing is, we were just talking about this yesterday, was the current model that is being used for our theater planning is something called the Maven Smart System. It's, I'm sure you guys have heard about it in the news, and Palantir runs it, and people think, oh, this must be really the leading and greatest model. But it's actually based on the Sonnet 3.5 model from 2 years ago. So something that was a mid-tier model from 2 years ago that now you can actually distill into a model that will run on your phone. Right? That's how capable it is. Or I guess how sophisticated it is as a model. And so there's a big gap between the perception that we have to have the biggest model and the most data centers and the most compute so we can make these giant frontier models, which cost billions of dollars to train and trillions of dollars in hardware. Right? Because those $1 trillion means that they can now build data centers faster, they can ignore regulations, they can get government contracts faster. All of these things that are very self-serving versus really about national defense. So I think we need to, so these are very parallel activities from both industries.
Can I ask a quick question? So I'm a Chief Information Security Officer. I have a very different perspective in terms of how war, the traditional form of war, and the landscape might shift, right? So think about cybersecurity, and I'm wondering, I've read that China is investing a lot. I know you mentioned AI, but I didn't hear the term cybersecurity come through. But if you think about it, war can start, and I worked at Fluke Corporation. They produce these little devices that are attached to electrical grids. And I've gone through threats from bad actors where they threaten to take down the electrical grid of the whole country within a matter of seconds, right? So the landscape of war may not involve a physical, component, even a drone for that matter, right? It could all be within a matter of seconds that a country is brought down to its knees. So what's the conversation as it pertains to cybersecurity, and what portion of the $1 trillion budget should really be looking at or investing in tightening up our cyber sort of strength?
Yeah, so actually, quick answer for that. Yesterday I just wrote an article for Cyber Brief specifically about this problem. And it talks about the current belief that the most dangerous models are the biggest models. And what my data shows is that actually there is no correlation between size of models and the actual real world threat. So, and cyber use, bad actor use, these are actually real problems. But those type of attacks are already capable on systems that will run on a laptop. Right, whether it's making bioweapons, whether it's making chemical weapons, whether it's doing cyber attacks, all of those are actually as capable on small models as they are on the largest models. Right? So defense is absolutely necessary, and actually the bigger threat is not a state versus state scenario, because there's asymmetric responses to that, and we already have essentially a balance that we've kept for decades. So that's not really the real problem. The real problem is bad actors, rogue actors,
and legacy systems.
And legacy systems. But it's a rogue actors taking action, against state actors, right? And that actually requires cooperation between states, not competition and walls between states, which actually makes the world more dangerous. So.
And the thing is, the system we have doesn't adapt, because we're still building the aircraft carriers, we're still building the nuclear weapons, And I think for cyber, part of it is talent, and part of it is regs and what the private sector does. And I know there's people thinking about that, but I think it's much less than it should be because they're busy making money on this other stuff.
Yeah, I would just add on the budgetary side, I do think this is one of the areas that actually is underfunded versus the threat that is out there. I wouldn't say that about much of the Pentagon, but for all the reasons that you said, I think are accurate. I think it's a real threat. And, the problem with, as many things at the Pentagon, is just the glacial pace of change. And, when you talk to, leaders, and you talk to rank and file of it, everybody gets the threat. They get that it's a real threat. It's just, it's unfortunately, it's a slow transition to create the assets within the military to address that threat.
I'd like to point out to you that just today, this administration, I won't say the person, announced that they want corporations to be involved in cyber attacks against foreign countries.
It's a bad idea. I don't think we want to escalate that issue. I mean, it's already a problem that we don't have a real defense for. It's the asymmetric nature of cyber means that the attacker has much more advantage over the defender. So if this really starts and both sides get hurt. There's no good that can come from it.
And AI just makes it exponentially harder.
Yeah.
Right?
But I think this administration somehow thinks you can attack and bully other people and they're not going to respond. But of course they are, not necessarily the way you did it, but at some point in a way that they can. And if you don't understand that, you're just sowing the seeds of conflict forevermore.
Yeah. Maybe let's do questions later. We still have a few more on the docket, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions. So, what is the biggest mistake do you think the defense policy has made the U.S. over the last 20 years? Make it specific. Just not a category.
I gotta go.
A specific decision.
One decision.
Yeah, one decision that each of you guys can point to is like what one bad decision did they make if you were going to pick one?
Iraq War.
Iraq War. You might want to hold the mic.
Oh. Iraq War. I can.
Well, I think as it plays out, the support for the genocide in Gaza, the occupation of Lebanon, and the war in Iran could catch up. But
Yeah.
let's hope not, but they've created such a mess.
So who or what could have prevented that as well as the Iran war? Any rule?
Rational thought.
We can't depend on that.
I mean, I think, even Bush, his people were saying, if you invade Iran, it's going to be a world of trouble. And apparently, according to the book on Trump by Maggie Haberman, even most of his people said it wasn't a good idea. He was like, it'll be like Venezuela. We'll go in, we'll change leaders, we'll add water, and it'll be a pro-U.S. regime that gives us their oil money. So I think there was, in addition to all the normal things of greed and empire, there was this added irrational element, which is what makes it so dangerous right now, is that you can't predict, now you can predict it's going to do every outrageous thing imaginable, but I think there's that added element that just makes the whole thing more irrational and more dangerous.
I think one sort of red thread in terms of a solution across these conflicts is reducing the power of the executive, increasing congressional oversight and congressional power, Congress's ability to rein in the executive. At the end of the day, for most of the conflicts that we've had, even before the Iraq War, going back decades, it's the decision of one person. One person is saying, we are going to use our military to kill people. And in many cases, do it on an indefinite time frame. And Congress has effectively been neutered now. And you're seeing it even right now in the Iran war with President playing games, with the restarting of the war. He's like, no, you can't rein me in, because I restarted, we had a ceasefire. And coming back, Congress has to reassert itself. And, that could at least, check some of this tyrannical behavior from executives.
I mean, the Constitution says the war power is actually in the hands of Congress, so it's their choice. Why are they, I guess, giving that up?
Well, we need to be the backbone of Congress, because they don't have enough on their own, I think. Members have to feel like, they talk about jobs in the arms industry. The only job they care more about than that is their own job. So until they feel that these policies are going to lose them their jobs, they're always going to kind of moderate and fumfer around, not really stand up to the president. And I think we're at a moment where we're seeing some interesting new people coming in. We're seeing more of an anti-war ethos, but we're not there yet. So I think we have to back the anti-war members so they don't get excluded and pushed down. And we have to call out the members who one day seem like they're for peace, but don't really do the job. They don't cut the money. I mean, if you cared about genocide, you would cut the money to Israel. You wouldn't just talk about it.
So
Could I follow up on that? So what is your strategy? How are you going to call them out? Do you have lobbyists? Do you have friends in the media? Can you pick up the phone and call Congress? Or are you trying to just influence public opinion more general?
All of the above.
Well, we do all of it, but I think the thing is, like I'm this guy sitting at my table in Manhattan. That's fine. I have ideas, but we need people on the front lines, like the downwinders who suffer from nuclear attacks, the people who are being hurt by these programs. So it's like we need kind of like a culture shift. And so I think think tanks won't necessarily be in the front lines of that. I think it'll be people organized and making it part of their lives, like the Friends Committee does or Washington PSR, but we need a lot more reinforcement. So if you look at all the movements that have had some traction, the movement for Black Lives, movement on immigration, the movement about Palestine, they're all fighting militarism in one form or another. So we need to go at the root. As long as they've got this big military machine, they can do all these things, including gun us down in our own streets. So I think somehow we need to build relationships among all these different strands, but you can't just say, oh yeah, your kid's being threatened, isn't safe going to school, but come and work with me on nukes. It's more like we have to understand each other's issues and work in concert, and that's hard work, but that's really, if I had a choice, do you need another Bill Hartung? No. You need more organizers. And I think there's a lot of good organizing happening, but it's not all fully connected yet.
I'd like to add one thing. What's going to happen is you're going to have your bond vigilantes do the work for you. The U.S. bond 30-year Treasury auction was horrible today. We haven't had an auction this bad since 2001. China's bond yields are going back lower, so because people are demanding Chinese currency for the new reserve currency, and the U.S. may lose its reserve currency, and that's going to force Congress to do something.
I would say, thank you. Thank you both. To piggyback off Bill's comments, we viewed this book, we had no illusions that this book in and of itself was going to, this would turn the tide. But we have always thought of this book as a weapon for peace. And that's something we wanted, as I mentioned early on, that we had all of this, we knew all this stuff. We wanted to put it in one place so we could give it to the organizers. And so, so we could give it to people on the ground so they could know, so they could understand the system. Because to your question, we talk to members of Congress, we talk to their staff, we brief them, sometimes we do everything. We kind of joke that we're think tankers, but sometimes we're lobbyists, and sometimes we're public relations professionals. We talk to the journalists. We do all of that. But as I also said at the very beginning, we are really, really outgunned on this. The industry has over 1,000 lobbyists. The Quincy Institute barely has 40 people, and there's a handful of other good organizations. We're really outnumbered on that front. What we need ultimately is exactly what Bill said. We need that groundswell of support. We need to vote members of Congress out, and we view this book as a sword. We can hand them to turn swords to plowshares, but we have to start with the information first. We want to give them the information.
So, just one more thing. I try to talk more to organizers, like in the Poor People's Campaign, or young people coming out of the ceasefire movement about what kind of information do they need to do their work. Because I could pile up statistics to the sky and depress you even further than you are now. But
He can, I've seen him do it.
which I did for about 40 years. And so I stopped doing that, and I think we need stories about cases where we've won, courageous people who stood up to power, the fact that people can beat these institutions if we come together in the right way. That's at least as important as me telling you how many people lobby for X or Y company. So it's sort of like that other side of it, the human side, the organizing side, what kind of world we want to build side, needs to be elevated. At the same time, we have this other work going on.
So a lot of people say the kind of stuff that you guys are talking about is not necessarily realistic because the system won't change. Do you have any evidence of any of the reforms that you guys are talking about would actually have a coalition and will be able to be executed?
Well, there's certainly historic examples. I mean, Ronald Reagan came in saying the bombing starts in 5 minutes. 6 years later, he said a nuclear war can never be won, should never be fought. It wasn't because of Nancy's astrologer. It was because there was a movement. 1 million people in Central Park, the Freeze movement, European nuclear disarmament movement. One of his people said, President Reagan, it's not just the usual suspects here. It's the mainstream churches, it's politicians. You have to come up with something. So he came up with Star Wars, but he also was willing to negotiate with Gorbachev. So I think you can really do quite a bit in quite a small amount of time. The problem now is there's so many issues hitting us at once. There's not a common language. There's conspiracy theories. So it's just, you got to work a little harder. But I think it comes down to connecting with other people in a way that is not just sound bites, actually human interaction, which, what a concept.
I'll give you, I'll rip one from the headlines for you about, why I think what we're doing does matter and can matter sometimes. Have y'all heard about the U.S.-Israel military-industrial integration proposal that's being considered right now? I'm gonna pat Quincy on the back for this. We broke that story. Like we were the first to write about that story, and I'll give you the funny backstory about how it happened. The National Defense Authorization Act had just come out. It's the defense policy bill, comes out every year, sets policy for the department. And myself and a couple other nerds, we were looking at this as soon as it came out. And we all, within a matter of minutes, we stumbled across this section in the NDAA, and we were on our private signal chat, and we were all just iterations of, oh, hell no, we're not doing that. And so we immediately went in action and said, we've got to let everybody know about this. And so it went from one of those things where you need nerds like us, to find stuff like that, to comb through the legislation, to identify that stuff. And then we kind of alerted the masses to it, and then the activists just ran with it. You have people showing up at town halls and asking their members of Congress about it. We talked, I won't say which office it was, but we talked with a congressional staffer right here in Seattle just yesterday, and she let us know that her phone had been ringing off the hook about that proposal. So kudos to all of you if you've been calling your congressperson. Like it's getting through. Like it really matters. And it's one of those things where, at the end of the day, will we stop this? I don't know. I think it's still in doubt. But if we weren't doing what we do, and if y'all weren't doing what you do, this would have just gone right through, and we'd have had this U.S.-Israel military-industrial integration, and would have been locked in for years or decades.
Okay, let's do one question, and then we'll move it to the crowd, which is, give me a number. What do you think a 2028 top line should look like, and what would we have to stop spending on to make that happen?
I would say 500 billion and maybe go lower, but it takes a while to do that because you got to unwind all these contracts. Certainly, I wouldn't spend a dime on Golden Dome. I wouldn't build a new ballistic missile. I wouldn't build any more aircraft carriers. I would reduce the size of the military, which is, as long as you have a military that's 2 million counting reserves, you got to clothe them, you got to feed them, you got to give them weapons. If you don't reduce the size of the force, you can only save so much. But if your position is, I'm not going to fight, I don't know of a war in this century that was really necessary. So I think if you structure yourself for defense, you could go down there, but it would take time because of the way the budget works. But that should be the goal, is to at least get down there, which was probably around what we were spending in 2000.
We were spending $500 billion at the Pentagon just a little over 10 years ago. And so, Bill's not talking about taking us to ancient history. This is very recent history. I would say, for me, I would put it on more of a guide slope. Because, when you talk to folks at the Pentagon, when you have people in charge of budgets, it's hard to cut a lot really quick for them. And they just, again, it's the inertia that we talked about earlier. And, cuts both going up and going down. It's hard. So, I'd put it on a glide slope. I think you could easily get down to 800, 750 billion and put it on that glide slope to find. I'm with you on that number. And ironically, you and I are in agreement with Palmer Luckey on that number. So in addition to the things Bill said, I completely agree on those. You got to stop the F-35 program. Stop the F-47 in its tracks. Don't start the F-47. Don't buy a single additional F-35. We do not need any more manned fighters. That's going to be useless. The nuclear modernization. Stop that in its tracks. We certainly don't need that. You can have plenty of nuclear deterrent, nuclear submarines. Your brother could probably attest to this. Other than that, another big bucket that really, really flies under the radar is service contracting at the Pentagon. And the Pentagon spends tens of billions, if not, it might be over $100 billion a year now, just on people to work at the Pentagon. And think about a service, estimates are around 800,000 service contractors working in the military. And the thing about them is they cost more than an active duty service member. Their compensation package is way more than an active duty service member, and it's almost double the cost of a DoD civilian. So if you can insource some of those positions, you can save tens of billions of dollars without compromising any measure of national security.
And if you want to lock that in, you have to invest in peace. You have to invest in diplomacy, in economic assistance, and cultural interactions with other countries, so that kind of demonization isn't as easy to bring about. Because if you don't do that, they'll just come back with another fear campaign, and we'll be back in the same place we are.
So what's the obstacle to making that happen?
Well, I think a lot of the stuff in our book, the lobbying, the greed, I think people have been indoctrinated with a certain idea of how the world works. I know, I grew up in what's now a MAGA district, and I think a lot of the guys who've taken it on the chin in the industrial economy are like, well, yeah, but I'm part of the toughest country in the world. Well, are we? To me, tough is you don't pull out a gun, you negotiate. That's tough. To just pile up nuclear weapons is naive. They call us naive. Well, what do you think is going to happen if they keep building those things? So I think we need to be a little more assertive about why we need to be tough-minded and disciplined and not just throw money at weapons and pile them up to the sky and assume that's going to save us when there's absolutely no evidence from this century that that works.
I will speak outside of Manhattan, your blue bubble in Manhattan. I live in a red state, in a red part of a red state in Florida. And I will tell you, it's a military area too, where I live in Northeast Florida, near Jacksonville. And I've never heard quite as much questioning about our military spending as I am hearing right now in my great state of Florida. And I think a huge part of it is there's this affordability crunch that's happening at the same time that President Trump is asking for this unprecedented increase in military spending. And it sort of feels like the disconnect is just extraordinary to people. And so when they hear these numbers, they're like, I can't put food on my table. I can't afford childcare. I can't afford the rent. And yet we're going to give another $60 billion to drop more bombs on Iran or to protect Israel. People just aren't buying it. Like, conservatives aren't buying it right now. So I do think, this election could be an extraordinary moment. And anybody here in the audience and anybody watching, if there was ever a time to talk to your member of Congress about being anti-war, like, this is it. This is a fantastic opportunity to get some anti-war politicians voted in and really start to change this equation.
Okay, so now back to the audience. Any questions you guys want to add?
First, a follow-up on what you said about the Sentinel, or the next generation ICBMs. Thank you for mentioning it. There are several people in the room here representing Washington Physicians for Social Responsibility, and we've only been weeks away from having launched a campaign for that very purpose, to stop and eliminate the next generation of ICBMs. So if you want to talk to anybody, hang around. Assuming that Lucky and Karp and Thiel and Musk are all rational animals, it seems to me they must be looking at themselves now and saying, dang, we scored much sooner than we thought because we're in a position of huge amount of authority and power. This is a prediction. I'm asking for a prediction, but I guess a response. How would they treat this if they'd had to go much slower? Or do they see this as an opportunity to create a better society? I mean, is there anything in their heads that would give them that kind of rational thought? I know it's a wild question, but.
Well, with hubris, I mean, they're going to go too close to the sun, and they're going to take us with them if we let them. But I think they do think there's a better way, but I think they know what it is. They're going to implement it. Government should get out of the way. We should get out of the way. So it's really, there's a strong kind of strain of narcissism and unreality. It's like, it's impressive that Musk can put stuff in space, but that doesn't mean he can do mass colonization of space. Nor can Peter Thiel live forever. And if he did, I won't want to sit next to him. It'd be my idea of hell, So I think they're overreaching. But I agree. At the moment, they're kind of killing it, right? I mean, they're outmaneuvering these big companies. They're making money. But I think they have to be brought down to reality.
What's the, Alvin, you probably know this better than me, but the running joke about Elon Musk is like, whenever you ask him when AGI is going to happen, the answer is always next year.
Well, that was FSD, I think, was the... But I mean, he's now working, he just released his new 4.6 version of Grok, which actually now has almost caught up with the rest of the other two companies, which, to his credit, is actually pretty good that he's done it so quickly.
Yeah, so I haven't read your book, but I am so impressed with the vision of stopping wars, preventing future wars. And as an individual person who can vote, contact my Congress people, I was so incented to come because the bottom line said, come learn what you can do. What can we, besides giving $250 billion to you to help, or buy the book, what is it that we can do to move this forward or help you with this process?
Well, I think, somehow we have to broaden out the movement. I know I've been in the peace movement pretty much my whole life, and for a long time I was the youngest person in the room. So I got older. No, I'm not. But, people would say, well, where are the young people? Well, they have their own issues, their own movements, their own meetings. So, how do we build those bridges? Most of the people I work with are younger than my daughter. They came out of the Palestine rights movement, or they're doing climate, or they're doing stuff at the border. And I feel like somehow we need to connect, encourage. It's amazing how a little bit of encouragement goes such a long way. So I think kind of building relationships among the different groups so that we have a sense of community, because we don't know how long this is going to take. And in the meantime, we need to nurture, support each other, which is what they did in the civil rights movement. I mean, they threw them in jail, and they sang so loud they let them out because they were tired of hearing freedom songs. I think we need that part of it, that there's some joy in the struggle, and we're not going anywhere, and we're going to build bonds amongst us. So that's kind of, I don't know, that's part of organizing in a way. And so in addition to what you're already doing, just see who's out there, make connections with them. And I don't know, what's going to be the one thing, but I do know that every time I look around, there's somebody doing something interesting and important that I didn't know about, and this is my job, you know.
Right. I would just add to that, don't, I fall into this trap myself, just thinking like, why am I bothering, you know, some days with this, I'm just like, dear God, like we're just up against it, and I just like feel defeated. Don't do that. Don't do that. Every single person, be the squeaky wheel. And we're really seeing, I mentioned the campaign about the U.S.-Israel military-industrial integration. It matters. Like, it really matters. We went on a lobbying trip to the Hill. I went with our advocacy team. We talked to a lot of different offices, Republicans and Democrat. Every single office we talked to was like, oh yeah, we're getting an earful on this. And we got some specifics from you know, the staffers who had to pick up the phone and talk to disgruntled constituents. And it stuck in their head. You know, we got anecdotal stories from people. And so, like, you know, those emails, those calls, like, all of that, it really does matter, and it can shift the needle. There was I will say locally here, Adam Smith, Representative Smith, he first came out in the it's called a markup, a congressional hearing for the NDAA, the Defense Policy Bill, where this was. He initially came out in support of this during the hearing, and you know, we were, those of us watching the hearing, were like, "What are you doing?" We were all ornery, you know. So we sent staffers some emails. We were like, "Please don't do that." You know, here's all the reasons you should not do that. That didn't move the needle. What he's now against this provision. He's on the right side of this, and he released a letter explaining why. It was because constituents educated, because constituents rose up on it. He is the he's the leading Democrat on the Armed Services Committee. So if he can be convinced, you know, to change the position because of constituent pressure, anybody can be convinced because of constituent pressure. So, like, really, don't sleep on how important that is to write, call, email, you know.
Let's do another
I
question
think it has
back
something to
there.
do with this primary challenge too.
Go ahead.
It's kind of a question, it's more of an answer. The Northwest against nuclear weapons is a coalition of the state. This is the only state that has that coalition that grew out of the Washington Physicians for Social Responsibility. If you've heard it, we're not a physician organization. We speak of health. We have board members who are non-physicians. So if you want an organization that talk to Adam Smith recurrently on that specific issue, come talk to us.
Another question.
Oh, yeah, well, it's if you join an organization, that's very powerful, because doing it on your own is going to discourage you. You know?
It's what I was going to say too. I'm the president of the organization, but I also wanted to say in answer to you, use your voice more than talking to your local congresspeople. Get out the vote in places where it matters. Georgia, Pennsylvania, Texas, make phone calls, write postcards, do whatever you can, because this election matters.
I'm in Wyoming in the winter, and it's what I do.
All right, maybe a question in the back there.
Thanks. I consider myself an anti-war and climate justice activist. I really appreciate much of what you were saying. Is it Bill? Can I say Bill? Like,
Yes.
really kind of paradigm shift, organizing level, like we need to move away from brainwashed ideologies that say safety comes from militarism. I mean, those are like, it's a paradigm shift, and that's why that we need. And that's why when you bring up Adam Smith, for example, yes, we could shift him on that one specific issue in the NDAA, but he is a hawk. He's a Democrat and he's a hawk. And Democrats vote almost as much as Republicans for an increasing bloated, maybe that's about to shift, but it's going to take more than just working with our electeds to make that happen. Sometimes I feel like the financial system is going to have to collapse to really wreck the machine, the war machine. And the last thing I wanted to say is that a question I'm not really sure is, it was really kind of disturbing to talk, that's part of the panel discussion where we talked about how much cheaper our U.S. militarism and imperialism could be if we just spent the money on AI. I mean, that is terrifying. Like, yeah, it could be $500 billion or less, but we would have a much more lethal. Just like I'd like to hear your response to like the part of AI, if there should be any part. We first started hearing about AI at the beginning of the genocide, because Israel was able to hit so many more targets so quickly because they were using, a version of AI at that time. So some response to that concern. Thanks.
Yeah, no, I don't want a cheaper killing machine if it's doing the same stuff as the more expensive one. And I would like members who are for peace across the board. So I think we can push our existing members to put out fires, to change certain things. And then if there's somebody who represents all of our views, then we have to support them. So I think, there's an issue of there'll be some sort of Pentagon budget, but we're so far from being in the defensive mode, that I think it's really like, what are the goals? Why are we fighting these wars? And if we could do it for less money, why would that be a good thing?
Yeah, we did leave that out, and thank you for bringing that up. It's a good call out. I'm always reminded when we talk about this. There's a Chris Rock, the comedian. He does a bit on if you want to stop murders in the U.S., just make bullets $1 million a piece. So somebody gets shot 6 times, $6 million. Geez, wow. And it's a joke, but there's a corollary in this space. If war is costly up front, hypothetically, thinking back to the Vietnam War, there's a draft. There's a cost right up front to engage in that conflict, to keep engaging that conflict. People feel it, they know it, it's everywhere. One of the sort of economic answers that's been proposed for this is if a president wants to declare war overseas, it's got to be a war tax. Got to do a pay for that. Got to tax the public to pay for that war. You do that instead of getting, because right now, we talked about earlier, the current way we pay for all of this, it's all on the credit card. It's all debt and deficit finance. And so the average American is just like, go to war, it doesn't really affect them. This war's being a little different, because the economics around it. But if you put that cost right up front and say, hey, we need, instead of asking for like what they're doing now, getting a supplemental to back pay for the war, if you ask for it up front and you put a tax on the American people for it, we're going to have a lot less wars.
I think we're out of time, actually.
We did it?
Yeah. Yeah, so I always say, if there wasn't a movement, what we do would be like some sort of peculiar hobby. So we really have to work this issue together. And I have to say I learn as much from activists as I have learned from books or my own research. So let's have at it,
Yeah, let's give these two guys a hand. You'll stick around a little bit for more.
Yeah, we're going to stick around. Oh, and we are selling books over there. For the low price of $30.
But you can also talk to us without buying.
Yeah, and we can just talk.